Okay, well, a very good welcome, everyone, to Pennine Ham this evening, to our members and to friends who have joined us tonight, and also to those who are watching on YouTube and those who catch up with this on the YouTube video that we'll put up probably tomorrow of the meeting that we've held tonight. Tonight's meeting, we're really pleased to welcome two people who are two of the presenters and people behind the UK amateur radio TV show called TXfactor that also has its own YouTube channel. They've got one or two more subscribers than we've got, but we only started as a club just a few months ago in August. And can I just say to everyone as we start off tonight, really pleased to tell you that we've now got 70 members of our club with the two people that joined up today, takes us up to 70. So I think that's fantastic news from where we started when we launched the club in August. So we're making nice steady progress and recruiting people both up here in the north of England, in the Pennines, but also other parts of the UK and other parts of the world as well. And all of you, wherever you come from, are always welcomed as great friends of the club. I mentioned last week that one of the very strange things that we've done as a club, or not strange, perhaps a fantastic thing we did. Mike is on screen tonight, where we got Mike and Adriana to give us some German lessons for radio amateurs to help us make our QSOs with our German friends. And we had a contact from a Japanese amateur who is working in Germany at the moment, who wanted to set up and learn a bit more about German and wanted the program notes for the meeting, which I've sent him, and he's been in contact with me. I did invite him. This is me being a bit cheeky, but we'll help you out with your German. Mike and Adriana will. Perhaps you'd come and give us a talk about amateur radio in Japan. And he came back and said, look, I'm a very, very new radio amateur. I'd only just got my license in Japan just before I came out to Germany. So in Germany, I've now got my German novice license. So I'm brand new to amateur radio. I don't think I'm really qualified to give a talk to your club about amateur radio in Japan, which is a shame. We will find a Japanese radio amateur to do that. But it's lovely when we have those types of things happening. So tonight's meeting are two people who have been involved, along with someone else I know, Pete Sipple from Essex Ham, who was one of the early people involved with TXfactor in its early days, that have provided a lot of fantastic material for radio amateurs to watch, both experienced amateurs like our Jeff here and people that were new to the hobby that discovered the hobby in the last few years and also discovered TXfactor. So without any more ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Bob and to Nick and let you guys take it away.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, check that you can hear me. I'm not muted this time. Yes, everybody's nodding. That's always a good start. So I'm located here in Cornwall, in Helston, in Cornwall, and my call sign G0FGX, which I've held since 1986. So I thought what we'd do is, first of all, just give a little bit of background about us. So I'm Bob. That's Nick. We're 2/3 of the current presentation team for TXfactor, because we have another guy called Mike Marsh, who I'll tell you a little bit about. You've seen him if you've watched the show. You've seen him in various episodes, but I'll tell you a bit about what he does for a living, which is very exciting indeed. So if we give you a bit of background on us, first of all. So for me, I was always interested in radio, but then one Christmas I got one of these for Christmas. I don't know if anybody remembers these, the old Philips Compact Electronic Engineer, and started to build all the projects that you could with it, and then started fiddling around and managed to build a transmitter that basically came out everywhere on AM. But my mum could hear it on her radio downstairs, and at the time, a pirate radio station called Radio North Sea had just launched, and that was it. I was like 11 years old and thought, that's what I want to do. I want to be a pirate broadcaster. So we sort of graduated to, when I was a little bit older, a converted Panda Cub transmitter that had a big blower on it to stop the AM mod FMing when it got very hot. And we had a successful pirate radio station for 3 weekends, and then the radio interference people in Southend decided to put an end to it, which was a great shame, particularly as my mum knew nothing about it until one day the Southend Evening Echo flopped through the letterbox and the story was on the front page of our appearance at the Magistrates' Court. So after that, I decided, right, I've got to go legal. And so I was training to be a teacher, but my brother lived in the Middle East in a place called Bahrain, where he worked for an airline, and they just launched an FM radio station there, an English language one. So I went out and joined him there, got a job on the radio, stayed there for 9 years. And while I was there, I found the time then to study for my RAE, which I did at the Gulf Technical College. The only person to ever take it there, I think. And there was no courses, so I did it out the book. Passed it, confused their telecom system there completely by going and asking for a license. And they'd only ever issued reciprocal licenses before. And I didn't have one. So they said, oh, we've not done this before. But being as it was a country where it's all about who you know, my boss at the radio station was a personal friend of the guy who ran the telecom. So they said, well, if you do a little Morse test, we'll accept your RAE pass and give you a license. So I became A9XCX. Then when the prefix changed, A92CX, came back to the UK where I had G0FGX, chopped that in 1986. I was able to swap in my Bahrain license for the G0, which I've held since, and then worked in a lot of radio stations in the UK, starting in Devon, Plymouth at Plymouth Sound. Then I went to Devon Air to launch a little opt-out for them called Southwest 103. Then I went to Orchard FM, and that's where I met this fella, Nick. And the funny thing was, every radio station I worked at, Nick had just left. So he'd obviously been trying to avoid me for several years until we eventually bumped into each other, Nick.
That's right, Bob. Yeah. Well, my history goes back to, well, when I was at school, actually, a gentleman who ran a radio repair shop in our neighborhood, and came round with a huge, great valve radio, you know, the kind of thing, fantastic cabinet, you know, really glossy and shiny with all these wonderful glowing valves, and for our friends in America, tubes that just fascinated me. And I was able to hear, actually, Bob may explain how this happened, the local 2-meter net in those days, and all these gentlemen sort of with their home-built transmitters having a chat. And I was fascinated. It was not just that, it was all the noises I used to pick up on the shortwaves and that kind of thing. And my mum was always listening to, I guess it was Radio 2 or maybe the Light program in those days, down in the kitchen. And I was fascinated by how somebody perhaps in London could present these programs, and this music and this speech was coming out into our kitchen. Yeah, that was the sort of magic of radio that got me interested. To the point where when I had a mate at school who was a little bit more involved in electronics than I was, and he was able to knock up little FM transmitters and things, and AM transmitters, and of course we dabbled in this. And I remember one Christmas we built this transmitter and connected the antenna up to his incoming telephone wires, which were you know, spaced pairs rather than the plastic coated drop wire that you get these days. So that was a fantastic antenna system, and it seemed to radiate into everyone's telephone across the whole of the neighborhood. We put on a record, I think it was Jesus Christ Superstar, which was the only record that he had available from his dad's collection, and went out into the neighborhood. We walked miles and miles with a transistor radio glued to our ears. And that was my kind of foray into pirate radio, as it were. Later on, I connected up. There was a neighborhood distribution system called Rediffusion. I don't know if anybody remembers the Rediffusion network. In Plymouth, the UHF and VHF television signal wasn't that good, and they didn't have sort of repeaters from the main transmitters in Cornwall and Devon. So they had a Rediffusion distribution network, which was an early cable system using a 100-volt line system. And there was a box outside my bedroom on the second floor of the house, and I was able to lean out of the window and connect an amplifier to this, and then back feed, if you like, a radio program that me and my friend Chris produced. And it went down into neighboring houses. And one day my mum, similar to Bob's mum, said there was a knock on the door, and some gentlemen from Rediffusion had come to see if I was dabbling in the wires. So that was my introduction to radio.
And then you became an engineer.
Well, that's right. After school and further education and all that malarkey, I wanted to become an actor, but my commercial radio was just about to start in the United Kingdom. This was sort of early to mid 1970s, wasn't it, Bob? And one of the first batches of commercial radio stations was going to be in Plymouth. Now, Bob already mentioned Plymouth Sound. So I thought, well, yes, I was already doing hospital radio at this time. So hospital radio, I think a lot of us are familiar with. In those days, you used to go and you would have the headphones that the matron would bring around and plug into the circuits. And so there was a radio station, a hospital radio station in Plymouth that I joined. But you know, a lot of us there were very keen to be involved in the proper commercial radio station, Plymouth Sound, which was due to come on the air in late 1975. So I did join that station as a technical operator and engineer, and that's where it all began. And I think Bob came some years later, didn't you, Bob?
Yeah, I came. Well, as I say, you always would just leave. You just left. You went to Devon, I think, from Plymouth, and I went to Plymouth, and I went to Devon, and you left. But we bumped into each other at Orchard FM, where Nick was the head engineer there. And that was a commercial radio station that covered all of Somerset, North Dorset, and part of Avon, as it was then. So it was a big station. And we were all scared of Nick because the first thing he would do is he'd always come into the studio, look over your head, over behind you at the PPM meters, and go, levels! Because all radio presenters were always got everything cranked up to the max so that the needles were sort of banging on the end there. So he would always sort that out. And then he would come and repair. I used to do the breakfast show, and he would come and repair the desk while you were doing the show, which because we didn't have another studio to do it from, did we? So you used to take it to bits while we were broadcasting on it.
That's right, hot servicing, I think we called it. But I think, yeah, Bob was always very considerate, weren't you? And used to play long records so that we could pull out these modules and replace the integrated circuits and things and pop them back in again whilst he was still on the air. Occasionally it blew the power supply, but not often.
Yeah, and of course in those days it was records, vinyl records we had. We did have CD players, but most of it was vinyl records. All the commercials were on cartridges. Those like an 8-track cartridge on a loop. So you played in your commercials and all your jingles. So it was a pretty busy old time, and keeping that all that gear working. Whereas these days it all comes off a computer. So there's not hardly any hardware, is there, compared with what there used to be that needed maintaining by the engineers. While Nick was working there as an engineer, I obviously had my license, and I kept saying to Nick, you should get an amateur license. You should get an amateur license. And he kept saying, oh yeah, I will one day. And we dabbled in various bits of radio linking, didn't we, for OBs?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, we were using VHF comms, which all the radio stations in the commercial network and the BBC, of course, had their own designated frequencies for their comms use. And we also had wideband transmitters, didn't we? We used for program, so that you're able to get a better audio bandwidth for higher quality transmission from your OB site. And this was one of the ways which we used to do outside broadcast. And of course, the other way was to use, well, originally post office telephone circuits, which later became, I think, in the early 80s, British Telecom provided what we used to call music circuits. And those of you who've worked for telecom will probably understand these were equalized circuits, which were basically part of the telephone network, but they could be amplified and equalized at the source, and again sort of de-emphasized at the remote end at the exchange, and then fed to the commercial radio station. And you've got a pretty decent audio bandwidth of up to 10K. So it sounded like the presenters were actually in the studio, even though they could be many miles away. And then Telecom had to provide those as part of their charter, I guess. And they were very cheap, but if they couldn't provide a circuit for any reason, then yeah, we used UHF. We had some great fun, didn't we, Bob, with running transmitters and things.
Well, we had to do a lot of sort of making stuff up, didn't we? Because being commercial radio, we weren't the BBC, so we were spending our own money, not yours. So that meant that we didn't have all those massive facilities, did we? So, for example, for our talkback, I had a Wizard Wheeze because I thought, hang on a minute, I've got a Kenwood Handy here, and it will go down to 143 megs, which was the talkback frequency when we were doing an OB. So I got the company to buy it off me. which was a genius move. And then the company owned the radio, but I had it for my ham radio activities, unless we were doing a broadcast where it went on to 143. So wind the clock on a bit. We then met another chap called Mike Marsh, who came and did an evening program with us at Orchard FM. And he is a man who's forgotten more about music than we'll ever know. He's a mastering engineer. In fact, if I can just share my screen here. There we go. There we are. That's his web page there, Mike Marsh Mastering. And he has been in the mastering business for, oh gosh, probably 30 years now. And the mastering, he's the man who does the final mastering for whatever format it's going to, whether it's going to vinyl or download, or if it's going to be mastered for CD. And he has a very impressive studio, which is now in Exmouth. He started off in London, and that studio closed, and he moved all the equipment, and there's a shot of his studio there. All that equipment was moved in the back of a truck from the studio in London. He built an exact replica because it had to be acoustically exactly the same as the studio he'd been working in for 20 years. Otherwise, he just wouldn't have been able to do what he does. And so he built an exact replica in an industrial unit in Exmouth, which is where he operates from now, and he works with the top names in the music business. So he mastered all the early Oasis albums. In fact, on the vinyl copy of one of them, I can't remember which one it is, one of the early ones, it's actually engraved around the center, dedicated to him and his Alsatian he had at the time, who used to go to the studio with him, called Inga, who is famous for having growled at Noel Gallagher. Presumably Noel growled back, I would imagine. But so Mike knows a lot about music. We met him at Orchard, where he did this dance show in the evenings. And then Orchard finished. We went off and all did different things. And it was a long time later, in 2012, I think. No, later than that. It's about 2014, wasn't it? 2014, we kind of got back in touch with each other and discovered that Nick had at last got himself an amateur radio license. Nick sent me an email and said, I've at last, all these years later, taken you up on what you said. I've got a license. And so we started talking about amateur radio, the fact that he was still working as a freelance sound man and also doing a lot sound engineering, because this is the other bit we haven't talked about for your career, Nick. You've worked as a sound man on so many BBC programs. Name a few.
Oh gosh, DIY SOS, Bargain Hunt, Flog It, Antiques Roadshow, Blue Peter, Grand Designs, Escape to the Country, Country File, Homes Under the Hammer.
Sooty, don't forget Sooty.
And Sooty and Sweep, four seasons of Sooty and Sweep.
Yeah. But that was important experience, because what you did there is all location shoots, isn't it? So much of it was location shoots rather than studio shoots. And there was a program, I don't know if our friend America who's here, who's ever seen it, but a program that's on in the UK called Country File, which is about the countryside and farming and wildlife. And we sort of thought, wouldn't it be great to do an amateur radio program that was like Country File, but with radios? So that kind of feeling of getting out and doing stuff and talking to people and doing a sort of a professionally produced show, rather than just, because there are loads of really useful videos on YouTube that people do, how-to videos, that are fairly simple and straightforward, and they're great. But we just thought it would be fun to see if we could put any of our professional experience into making a TV show about amateur radio. So we put together a pilot, and we worked quite hard on that, didn't we? And then we thought, blimey, how are we going to make this pay for itself? Because it's going to cost money to do this. And we thought, I know, we'll get a sponsor. Who would be a great sponsor? What about Mr. Lynch? So we sent him the sort of pilot version before anyone else had seen it. And he asked us to go and have a meeting with him. And we went and met him in his boardroom at Lynchy Towers. His wife was there, and his son, who's now running the business, I think. And he said, oh yeah, we'd love to sponsor this. And so we were sort of off and running. We had a sponsor, which was Martin Lynch and Son, and we also Yezu were a sponsor. And then we suddenly thought, blimey, now we've got to make some programs. So that sort of started us off, and it's a hobby. It doesn't make money. The idea is that it will wash its face and that we can put something back into the hobby and have a bit of fun doing it. And I think one thing we did do was we set Martin off on the video road, and of course he does very successful videos of his own now on his website. And his son, who was, how old was he, Nick, when we started? He wasn't very old, was he? 15?
Oh,
16?
I think it was, yeah, 16 to 17, something like that.
And he said, oh, he's interested in videoing and that sort of thing. Can he come out with you? And so he came out on some shoots with us, and he then went to college and did that. And so he now makes all the videos that are on Martin's site. And so that kind of, I think we launched Martin down that road. And now we're sponsored by the RSGB, and that helps. And the idea is really just to get a little bit of cash in so that we can pay if we've got to travel and just pay our costs. And also people have made donations as well to keep us going. We've done a lot of episodes, and I think I'm just going to have a look in a second. I'll pull up our website, but our last episode was 31. That's right, isn't it, Nick?
That's right, 31, yeah.
And we should have done more in the time, because it's 10 years we've been doing this, but COVID kind of got in the way, as it did for everybody. And that stopped us doing a lot of the traveling. And then sort of our real lives got in the way. So we're only just getting back into producing more regular episodes, which is the way forward. So if anybody hasn't seen the show, we've got a bit of a video. I think Nick back there at Pennine HQ can play this in for us, but we have got a video that's just some clips of some of the things that we've covered over the years.
It should go on, but seems to have frozen there. Maybe a bit more frozen.
Yeah, it is frozed. I don't know. Can you give it a kick, Nick, or is it? Okay. There should have been some more of it than that, so don't quite know what happened there.
Yeah. Bob, what did happen there? Sorry.
I don't know.
It just stopped halfway through.
It stopped halfway through. There should have been more of it.
Okay. Do you want me to carry on where it stopped?
Yes,
If you
please.
can.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. I'm going to try. I don't know what happened there. You were talking, and
Perhaps we'll mute ourselves while.
yeah.
I was muted, so I don't know what happened.
Which I will do when I can find what's happened to it. Oh, I know what I've got to do. Sorry. Right.
This is why we gave you the job of doing it, Nick.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, thank you, guys. Right. I'll tell you what it is. I'll explain to you afterwards.
QRZ from Mike X-Ray 0 Sierra Whiskey calling QRZ over.
No, all right. See you later. Sorry, Martin. We're here.
Thank you, Nick, for getting that running again. I think we need more bandwidth actually, because it's probably a big file and full resolution, and therefore it was the
Zoom
whole
said, ouch.
internet. Yeah, the whole internet was struggling there. But thank you very much for playing that in. That represents actually only about 15 episodes, doesn't it, Bob? So it's only we need to update that to show some of the clips that we've covered over the more recent years. And I think just going back to what Bob was saying about how we decided how TXfactor would be, I think it kind of evolved, didn't it, over the years? But even 10 or 11 years ago, there were some, as Bob said, there were some amazing YouTube channels out there. And a lot of the ones connected with amateur radio tended to be amateurs sort of sitting in their shacks with a big microphone, particularly on the sort of North American ones, just having chats about things, which were good. Then people started using their iPhones to create short clips about how to do something, which were extremely useful. And then as technology improved and people could edit and do that kind of thing and put swoofy graphics and animations in, so the quality of YouTube clips about all subjects started to really improve. So we had to be ensure that we were informative, entertaining, I think was another kind of factor involved, and not just talking in a studio or in a shack, but getting out there and filming real people doing real things, as you probably gathered from that brief clip.
And what it shows as well, it just reminds you of the diversity in amateur radio. As a hobby, there can't be many hobbies that have so many different facets to them. And and it's great because you can have a particular thing that you really like and just be in that niche in this hobby, or you can be trying new things all the time. There's always new stuff coming along, and I think we've really enjoyed meeting some of the people that we've met who do interesting and strange things. Like the guy, there was a clip there of the guy who flies his antennas off kites, and that was about our second episode we did, and he was absolutely brilliant. And I think we've noticed doing this show is when you meet people within amateur radio who have a passion, how great they all are at explaining that passion and getting it over. I think people are very evangelical about this hobby. But one of the things that we do, we know, is that we reach very much to ourselves, preach to the converted. So I think one of the things that we'll touch on later, thinking about the future, is how we can help maybe through some of our programs to get people interested in amateur radio through other things that we cover in the shows and get those videos out there more widely. And to that end, we were asked to do a video for the RSGB, which was aimed at getting young people into amateur radio, which that was probably 8 or 9 years ago that we did that. And we've done a number of other things for the RSGB since then, that in addition to TXfactor. So to make a show that looks like a TV show, but with a small team, and to maintain that professionalism, I think a lot of that is down to Nick and the technical wizardry he brings to it. So Nick, could you just tell us a bit about the, how we produce it, really?
Well, I think having worked in radio and latterly in real TV for some years, even as just as a sound guy, going out with a fairy microphone and a pair of headphones, you get to learn obviously the skills and techniques of all your professional co-workers, and so one gets an understanding of how TV films are made, and I think we just applied that to TXfactor in such that it's all very well having a camera and just kind of whizzing around and whoever speaks just panning a camera quickly, and but that kind of is, I think that the listeners would the viewers would find that somewhat distracting and irritating after a while. So as Bob will testify, when we do an interview or a piece to camera, it's always good to film the interviewer. Then you go back and the interviewer re-asks all the questions, and then you get the other angle. And then, of course, it comes the process of joining it all together, the post-production, and that's what probably takes the time and effort to make it look like it's a multi-camera production, if you like. I mean, this is what the professionals do, and this is what we try and emulate. And I think somebody commented a few years back, we had, I don't know what the feature was, but they said, how did you manage to do that? No, how many cameras did you have? Expecting us to say, oh, we had 3 or 4 cameras. And I said, well, just the one. And they said, well, how did you do all that with one camera? Well, I mean, the secret is it takes a while to even film an interview properly to get, all the shots that you want. The close-up of as I say, the contributor, the interviewer, maybe a 2-shot coming back to see them in context, with the background of where they are, maybe a super wide shot. For example, when we went to the transmitting site in Hereford, Bob. Wooferton, that's right. Because you had these tall, huge masts and antenna arrays, we needed to see that Bob was standing in a huge field with the gentleman's name I've forgotten, but with all these wonderful aerial arrays in the background, so super wides, and this all adds interest and context to the production, and this is what we try and do. And I think people do appreciate that. They do say your production values are quite good. It seems like we're singing our own praises here, but I mean, it is what we do, and I think adding music gives a kind of creates a mood within some of the items, doesn't it, Bob? Nice sort of title sequences. So Bob mentioned country file with radios. A lot of YouTube channels these days, they just have a very zappy introduction, and people say, hi guys, today we're going to talk about this. But we're kind of almost, old school, if you like, where we have a title sequence, what's coming up in this program. Then we have commercial breaks, which is the sort of slot where our sponsors have their message. And then, coming up later on in the program, we're doing this. And then a title sequence at the end with the credits rolling and that kind of thing. And it makes it, country file with radio. So that's what we try and do.
So the warning you got there is if ever we interview you, just realise it's going to take blinking ages because we're going to do it about 3 times. What we do try and do, actually, one of our great cheats is to do the questions after the interviewee has gone away. That saves them standing there for a long time. So you do the questions and you do it with the interviewee, and then they can go off, and then if it's me that's doing the interview, then Nick can do the close-ups of me asking questions as if they were still there. And he shouts at me a lot about maintaining my right eye line and standing in the right position. He's very good at that attention to detail, because and I'd never done anything like that before. I'd done radio all my life, but never had to stand in front of a camera and do it. And that it does add a whole new level of complication. Standing in the right place. Well, it's walking and talking at the same time, and that's multitasking, which I'm not very good at.
It sounds like I'm being very grumpy, like I was back in the days of radio, telling you about your levels. But I think it is distracting, even though the viewers may not know about eye lines and things. They will know that something's wrong if you are looking from camera right to camera left. And then your interviewee is also looking in that direction. It's going to look odd. So you have to make sure that, the eye lines are right. I mean, we do use several cameras. We do use multi-cameras sometimes, don't we? Especially during a demonstration of a piece of kit or something where you're looking at a video screen. So yeah.
Yeah, our biggest technical cock-up was the famous clock. In Mike Marsh's shack, we shot something in his shack and forgot to take the clock off, didn't we?
That's
And
right. So we film things out of, yeah, like all broadcasters, film things totally out of sequence. And you know, I've been on dramas as well where the continuity people have to make sure that if there's a clock in shot, the clock has to be, would take the battery out, but you have to move the hands according to where the shot you're filming is in the sequence of events, you know, in
which we didn't do, which meant that it just randomly hopped about time-wise, because when it was cut together, it had all been filmed out of sequence. And so
Yeah.
there was a clock in the background, and 1 minute it's 10 to 11, then it's a quarter past 11, then it's 10:30. And we didn't realize it until afterwards. So we thought, say nothing, and nobody has ever commented on it, have they?
But what people have commented on, Bob, I think you may remember some of these, is some of the sort of things that you wouldn't even think about when you're out on location. For example, the famous one about those of us who live in the country, or even if you don't live in the country, you know about the country code. Always, if you go into a field or if you walk through a field, what do? You should make sure you shut the gate.
Yeah, we had an email. That was after our very first episode, which finished with me walking through a gate up on Ham Hill in Somerset with my dogs and walking off into the distance. And actually, the gate was on a spring, so you didn't need to shut it. It was one that you opened and it went boom, went back into place. But of course, that wasn't in the shot. And somebody sent us a very grumpy email about not shutting the gate. And it's interesting the feedback that you do get, because it's often things like that. And we had somebody else who entered into a big debate because I think I can't remember whether I signed stroke A or stroke portable or whatever, but then got one of those big debates that sometimes happens in amateur radio about what the correct one should have been. Should it have been stroke P or stroke? What does the license say? And we got all involved in the an email back and forth about that. But then you think, well, that's great, because you want a reaction. It'd be much worse if we put these things out there and they were met with stony silence. And we've covered some really interesting things as well. I think if you have a look, if I'll just share the page again so that you can see our website there. When you go to txfactor.co.uk, you can see all the episodes listed there that we've done so far. And there was one really fascinating one. I think the most fascinating one for me was when we went to Goonhilly, which is only a few miles down the road from where I live. And there was a team there using one of these big dishes to do a little bit of moon bounce. And it was a dish that had been decommissioned from what it was doing. It's now been recommissioned because I think it's involved in deep space communications stuff now. But they had use of this dish, and they did a moon bounce operation off that dish. And it's one of those things that people think that we set it up, and we absolutely didn't. In that Nick said, could you just do a CQ call? And they had it all set up. I mean, it was being transverted up. I'm not sure what frequency the uplink was actually. It does say in the video, but I've forgotten. But it was transverting up to the uplink and going up to this enormous Goonhilly dish. And so I put out a CQ, and Nick was filming it, and an SM came back to us, bounced off the moon. So we got a call back, and it was just completely blindsided us, because I'd never operated moon bounce, and it was all kinds of horrible Doppler. But I have done a bit of low Earth orbiting satellite stuff, so I kind of tuned the Doppler, and we managed to have a QSO. But it was completely, and everybody we met after that said, "Oh, you set that up before, didn't you?" And it was just absolutely not, completely called out of the blue on moon bounce. So it's some interesting things that we have done, and things that we've seen. I think the other most interesting one for me would have been the Wooferton high power transmitting site, to going and seeing transmitters that run on AM at 250k, 250 kilowatts of AM, particularly, you know, with our broadcast background, and thinking back to my slightly hacked about Panda Cub transmitter running 10 watts, varying between AM and FM, depending on how it felt. And, you know, the modulation transformer, you'll see it in the video if you watch it, the modulation transformer is nearly as big as this room that I'm sat in at the moment. So spectacular equipment. So it's a great hobby, provides lots of subjects for us to film. But, you know, when we have a chat at the end of our waffling, maybe, you know, it'd be interesting to see if you've got any suggestions for other things that we could do. So just very quickly to round it up, Nick, just tell us about the gear that you use.
Well, a lot of YouTubers just tend to use their iPhones, and let's face it, iPhones and other phones are available. The quality is stunning these days, 1080p. I mean, the lenses aren't obviously as good as a broadcast camera. So we currently use a Canon XF605, I think. So it's a small compact camera, but does 5K. Radio mics, audio limited radio mics, Sennheiser radio mics. The program is edited on Final Cut Pro. I've been using Final Cut Pro for 20 odd years, going right back to the original release by Steve Jobs back in, it must have been the early 90s.
1800s.
Yeah, LED lighting, and that's about it, really.
Can I just say something that shows your attention to detail in this is the color correction.
Oh, right, color correction.
You probably wouldn't think about that if you've got a long video that's got lots of bits in it, but you try and make sure that the color all matches.
Yeah. Well, even the best of cameramen will slightly overexpose. Those of you really into photography and videography, you know that you can switch your camera to automatic, and the sound, the exposure, the color balance, everything is looked after for you. A professional cameraman will tend to do everything manually, but will still make mistakes, especially if you're on the run and shooting documentary style. So when it gets back to the post-production stage, the editor will just cobble it all together, and then it'll go into post-production color. You've probably seen in credits on various programs, colorist or color correction or whatever they call themselves, where each shot is graded, and so it's graded for color to give the skin tones. I'm looking a bit red now, but the skin tones, the proper what we expect, with reference to white, and adjust the exposure, because if you're shooting these days, you can shoot in a raw format, which means you just gather all the information, and all the parameters of exposure, color, and everything else can be tweaked after the event, which is mind-boggling, really. So yeah, we try and go through and tweak every shot to make it legal, broadcast legal. Yeah, so it does look good. I mean, these days you watch a UK drama or a drama produced by Netflix or whatever, and everybody's into themes, aren't they? Color themes. So if they're shooting in cold, grey, foggy, misty London, it's very blue. If they suddenly go off to California, then it's all bright colors and bright, and this adds interest to, and puts things into context for the sake of the drama, for the story. But yes, that's what we do. And obviously, being a sound recordist, then try and get the audio right as well.
So the one thing to say, though, despite all of this, you can do a lot of surgery on what we've done afterwards. And, you can walk away from stuff that we filmed going, oh, blimey. I say to Nick, because, particularly when it's a technical one where I've been going through a rig, and I'll get to a point where I go, blimey, I can't remember how you do that, because it will be a new rig that we're looking at, and you have to get the manual out and look at it and go, right, we'll shoot that again. How you stitch it all back together and make it look proper, I don't know. But it doesn't always work, does it? And I think we have a little video that shows the occasions when things don't go quite to plan. Usually my fault.
Shall I make it
if slightly? Could, that'd be great.
Shall I make it slightly smaller, Bob, than I did last time? Would that help, you think?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Let's try that.
How much are they? Oh, so I'll just come in and say how much your mugs, mate. How much your mugs, mate?
You've changed it.
So how did he finally silence those doubters? Finally. How did he? Right, we'll start again. So there we go. That's it for... There we are, just lose the nut in the long grass and spend the next 7 hours looking for it. Of course, these days when you go backpacking, you can... Now, in 1962, when they did this, they used Telstar, which... Gonna do that again? Yeah. So this monster behind me, Arthur, is historically significant because that was the dish that was used for the first TV pictures to come across the Atlantic from America, from horizon to horizon. Can you imagine the mechanical? So Arthur there was actually able to track it. Now imagine the mechanics of getting that dick, of getting that dick. Imagine the mechanics. Right, look at me again. And of course, the RSGB now has a presence on social media, so that's on me. On me. That's I did that thing where I left myself, you see, I left myself muted. Nick said I would, and I did. So there we are. Doesn't always go to plan, as demonstrated there. A final blooper for you. So that's it. That's us. That's TXfactor.
Even Nick's muted.
So having warned you not to keep yourself muted, I did it to myself. So yeah, thank you, Nick. Yeah, thank you guys. That was really good, great fun, and we all enjoyed the bloopers at the end. But super production. Let's chuck it open now to our audience here. See what they all made of it. Who wants to make a point, ask a question, anything you like to our two presenters? Who wants to go first?
Hi, Bob and Nick. Michael here from Ireland. I know what I'll be binge watching for Christmas now.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. And you know, that's we were talking the other day, weren't we, Nick, about getting to Ireland as well, because we talked to a lot of Irish amateurs, and there's a lot of stuff going on over there, and especially the really good link repeater systems and all of that. So that's something we'd like to do one day. So if you've got any suggestions of good things that we could come and film in Ireland, we'd love to hear from you.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Michael. Keith, I think you were trying to make a point.
Yeah, good evening, both of you. Good to see you, and not seen you for a long time on the screen. Just a couple of observations and a question. I remember the Tim Peake transmission because I was driving between Taunton and Glastonbury with 145-800 on the radio in the car. Lo and behold, his voice came up, which surprised me. The other thing was Jim, G4JBA, and myself, we used to go on training courses at Lee Field Radio Station, and a tour there enabled us to actually walk into the transmitter and walk around the main transmitting valve, which was some size, I tell you. It wasn't live, of course, so we were okay there. And my last question for you, actually, Bob, how's your QO100 system working lately?
Oh.
It was on your fridge, wasn't it, in the garage?
Don't start him on this.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Actually, yeah, you can just see it. That is it. If I move, that there is the QO100 transponder.
Oh, right, brilliant.
At the moment. So I've got the there's a video all about it, of course, in TXfactor. So if you haven't seen it, guys, check that out. But I used the DX Patrol Ground Station 2, which is made by Antonio in Portugal. And it's quite good because it was because I'm lazy, it was an in-one box solution. So you basically provide it with some TX IF, and it gives you your downlink IF. So you connect it up to the LNB on the dish, and then out of it another cable for the 2.4 gigs transmit, which goes to a 4-turn helical on a 1 meter offset dish that I've got. And then it's the Ground Station 2, you can select what your IFs are, so you can choose what bands you want to do to transfer up and which band you want to transfer down. So I've got, I think you can just see it there. Behind me is the FT857, which I use for transmit on 144. And that goes all the way up to my garage because the dish is a long way from my shack. So that's why I put it up there. And then it doesn't matter about the length of the cables for the IF. It's not so much of a problem. And so, yeah, been having tremendous fun with that. And then On receive, I'm using, if I don't know if lots of people do other SDR stuff, but if you haven't used SDR Console, which is actually a Cornish production, a chap called Simon wrote the software. He lives down the road from here. That software, which if you use it with your whatever SDR receiver you have, is absolutely brilliant. And I use that with an RSP1 for the receive downlink, and it's like having a permanently open HF band. It's brilliant, and I can bore you forever about that, so I'll shut up now.
Oh, brilliant. No, I got the SDR Play 1 as well. Great piece of kit, I must admit. And thank you for that. It's great.
Thank you, Keith. Anyone else with a question or comments? I see Rachel, you piped up and said you're going to be binge watching the show as well. So you've got I think we've supplanted, we've supplanted Essex, Billericay, and Barry Island for amateur radio with your show.
That's great.
Yeah, who else wants to go? Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks again, Bob and Nick. I always think the TXfactor shows, which I've watched from the start, are so professional in their production, and that's a big stamp of success for what you're trying to do. Long may it continue.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jeff.
Thanks. And we're really always, as I said just a moment ago, for suggestions as to things to cover. It's we can't cover everything that people suggest, but there's always people doing interesting new things, and it's great if we can do something about those. I know, Nick, you've been dabbling in this Mesh-tastic thing, haven't you? We've got to do something on that, because I don't even understand what that is.
Yeah, well, I mean, about 4 or 5 years ago, I discovered LoRa, which is basically long-range spread spectrum technique of sending little short data bursts, really. And I think somebody grabbed hold of this and thought, well, it's great for the Internet of Things, but why not have an off-grid sort of text-based communication system, which I guess started again 2 or 3 years ago and has grown over the last couple of years. And for those of you who've heard about Mesh-tastic, you know that it's not just for amateur use. It's everyone out there has these little devices now which just use a couple of milliwatts of this little chirp of data that goes out, and they've built an amazing kind of off-grid network, which we would like to feature in a future episode. So that's something that we have to put our minds to, Bob.
I think the great thing about amateur radio is often, people are outside our hobby looking at it and go, well, why do you do that? And you go, well, because we can. And it's interesting to make it work. And I think another thing, personal thought of mine on the usefulness of amateur radio in what are uncertain times is the resilience of the amateur radio network. As evidenced, recently in the US with the flooding and, the hurricane damage, and we see it elsewhere around the world, that when everything else fails, the amateur radio still works. And what people are beginning to think about here in terms of linking repeaters and so on, making repeaters that will work when the power grid goes down, and having links that aren't internet based as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, George, you got your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much, both of you. This very interesting presentation. I was just wondering, how long does it take you to produce an episode of TXfactor, from the first ideas to deciding what's going to be in an episode, doing all the filming, and then the post-production?
I think it varies, George. I think we tend to have an idea, and then suddenly we have 3 ideas. We put them together, and we obviously logistically we try and to cut the costs down, try and do things together if it involves travel and hotels and all that kind of thing. So possibly over several weeks we might do the filming, and then come back, and it's really a slog really just to get everything together, because the RSGB being our main sponsor these days, they like to know when an episode's coming out. They like to know what the content is going to be, so they can organize their sponsor message around what we do, to kind of have a continuity with what we're talking about and what they would like to promote within the RSGB. So I think once the ball gets rolling, you know, it kind of happens over a period of, say, a month. And then when the episode is like version 1 is ready, then it goes out for to Bob and to Mike and our friend Pete Sipple, who we mentioned earlier, who helps with a technical review. So he's very good at kind of the equivalent of video proofreading. You know, he goes through and checks everyone's call sign and makes sure that we haven't said something that's technically not quite accurate, and then comes back and we do the amendments. So I would say maybe a month, month and a half, maybe 6 weeks, something like that, from a kind of let's get another episode out to actually releasing it. Initially, we used to promote our releases. So we would say we would send out a sort of a mass email to all our subscribers to say an episode is going to be available on such and such a date. And I used to sit here and watch the clock at midnight and then sort of launch it. But I think these days, with people being subscribers and having the little bell clicked on the YouTube, for example, they just know when an episode is launched. And like all these things, suddenly you launch an episode at a random time, at a random date. And then within minutes, you know, it's like hundreds of views have been clicked up. So that's always very encouraging to see that. And then the kind of the viewing figures rises, doesn't it, Bob? And then it kind of tails off over a number of years. But still, even episode 1 is still receiving clicks. So people are looking. I know Rachel's going to have a binge watch, so maybe
Yeah,
Rachel will start at episode 1 and work her way up.
Yeah.
I hope
And,
that's
and some things are a little bit more complicated to organise as well. For example, when we filmed at the BBC, there was all kinds of permissions and things we had to get there. And of course, you have to promise. Maybe it's long enough after the event that I can tell the truth about this now. But that one of our bloopers was on national radio inadvertently, if you remember, Nick. When you sign all kinds of things that say that you can only bring in certain approved equipment, and you know you're not allowed to plug anything into their mains, were we, or anything like that. There's all kinds of connecting to their systems in any way.
This is New Broadcasting House in London.
Yeah.
You see on the news every night at the
Yeah, so it was great. We went in there and we filmed, and we went there to talk to Jim Lee, who probably most of you know. He's a continuity announcer on Radio 4 and also on Radio 4 Extra. Hear him a lot on Radio 4 Extra, and a newsreader, obviously Radio 4. And so we went to talk to him, as he's a radio amateur, and shoot some other stuff at the Beeb while we were there. Going, say, from the news. Oh, I've got an unstable internet connection, it says here. Am I woggling or am I all right?
You're okay now.
Okay. Yeah, you would think there would be swarms of people around. Actually, Jim Lee was self-driving in Radio 4, basically, wasn't he? So all the audio, all the programs that are going to be played out are all there on computer. He does his links, and he had pages and pages. You'll see it because it's on the video he did. Pages of scribble where he's back-timed it all, because you can't crash the time pips at the top of the hour and things like that. So when he's forward promoting his next program, he's got it written down in tiny detail and got it all worked out. And we sat in the continuity studio with him where they came out of the news, and then he was doing a pre-prom for another program. Then they went into the Archers, that well-known radio soap opera. And my iPad was in a bag on the floor, and I'd set an alarm on my iPad to remind me. I can't even remember, but it's probably to remind me to make sure I turned off my iPad before we went in the studio. I can't even remember what it was. And he was actually in the middle of his link, and it went off. And at the end of it, so he was going into the Archers, and this thing went in the background. And he said, "Did you hear something then?" And we went,
"No."
And we thought, so we went out and afterwards got in the car and went on to the listen back on BBC Sounds, and blow me, you could hear it clear as a bell in the background. So if you ever meet Jim, you didn't hear this from us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for that question, George. Anyone else want to dive in with a question while we've got Bob and Nick here? Yeah, go on, Roger.
Yeah, just a quick question really to Nick. something he said. It's a very niche thing, though. He said you normally overexpose videos. I don't do video, but I do still photography. I've always been told, especially when shooting RAW, you should underexpose because you're going to be able to raise it out the noise. But once it's blown out, the sensor, it's gone. I wonder, is that still a thing even videoing in RAW?
No, if I said you overexposed purposefully, then I didn't mean that. No, I tend to prefer. I like, when you talk about clamping down your black level and you bring down your whites so that they're 100%. I like the blacks to be black, so I do tend to, when I'm shooting, to underexpose. So, but occasionally you can't help it because if your subject is backlit, then you're going to expose for their face, for example, and therefore the background tends to be slightly overexposed. That's inevitable. So yeah, not deliberately, but it does happen. So that when you get back, you have to. I mean, you can tweak to your heart's content. Really, you can adjust the exposure around a subject and then bring the background level down if it's very bright. And just keep the correct exposure for their face.
Yeah, that's what I thought. You overexpose the whites that will be blown, and you can't do anything with them.
No,
but down in the black, you can get it out, dig it out of there with some software. It can do it, can't it?
Yeah,
that's where that. Right. Thanks for that. Thank you.
I think I like blacks to be black, so you don't see the noise and the kind of the fuzzy shadows.
Has the technology changed a lot in the time that we've been doing it? Because I mean, it's been 10 years. Because I noticed with the editing, you can do stuff now that we didn't used to be able to do. Like I fouled up something completely when I said completely the wrong thing, and I told you where it was, and you edited it out, and I couldn't understand how you could edit that out without it looking like a jump. But it's you had some software that smoothed that out.
Oh well,
the audio.
Final Cut Pro and all the other editing platforms, DaVinci Resolve, and they all being digitally based. Basically, you can do anything. If the people who create these wonderful packages know there's a need to do something, they'll devise a way of doing it. And if you know how to operate it, and you practice and you think, I wonder how you do that, and you play around with it, then it becomes second nature to actually just do what we call flow edit. So you can, if somebody is sitting relatively stable and you want to cut out a whole sentence, you can chop out a whole sentence, and you can digitally blend it such that you can't even see the edit. So all your bloopers, Bob, they've all been digitally removed.
Most of the rubbish has been digitally removed, and at the end it makes it look like I know what I'm talking about, but you know the truth. It's all thanks to Nick's editing. I don't actually know what I'm talking about.
Anyway, thank you. I like the bloopers. I think they make it more human, to be fair. So I like a little bit of bloopers. Not a bad thing, I think, sometimes.
I mean, there are many more bloopers, but we tend to, like a lot of programs, tend to use them sparingly at the end of some episodes, just that people say, "Oh, we like the bloopers," and it just reminds people that we're human. Well,
yeah, semi-human. And I think over the years, we've had some wonderful ones in radio as well. So we always know the value of a good blooper.
Yeah, I did. I enjoyed your bloopers. I think we all did, and it's nice to know that we're all humans, aren't we? And we can make mistakes, and sometimes we get caught out, and a lot of the time we get through it, and we think, "Phew, how did we do that?" But
I think it's always good to see serious actors that you know and love, behaving like idiots as well.
I think back in the 80s, end of the 70s, early 80s, the BBC VT engineers used to do a Christmas tape, didn't they? Which was the swearier version of "It Will Be All Right on the Night," where it was all their outtakes that they collected and shared amongst themselves. And that video used to sneak out into the public domain, and that was absolutely wonderful because there were many, many famous people saying things and doing things that they thought nobody would ever see. So that's quite funny. But yeah, it's. I think the main thing about what we do is trying to put it all together so that it is an easy watch. And I think that Nick says to keep it interesting in the edit. I think that's the most important thing, because one of the things with if you're doing it like a YouTube video and you're doing it on your own and you're doing it with your phone, and you'll often see the videos where people are showing you how to do stuff, but you've got to wait 3 or 4 minutes while they find the right bit on the computer and all of that. You know, which is exactly the same thing happens when we do it, doesn't it? You know, when we film it, but we're able to chop all that out
and redo it
and redo it 8 times.
Yeah, and of course for us as radio amateurs trying to do stuff, it's not getting the familiarity of it, isn't it? You know, so if we're trying to produce a little video compilation, because we're not doing the stuff all the time, even if we use a really simple program, it's very difficult to achieve anything like what you can achieve, because this is what you're living and breathing, and we're not.
I think that's an important point, Nick, because I mean, there's a chap whose call sign I can't think of, but his name is Andreas. He lives in Weston-super-Mare, and he's prolific. He must, I mean, we've produced 31 episodes. He must produce 3,000 episodes. Some of them are like a minute long, but if you want to know anything about anything radio related, go onto his channel, and he solved the problem for you. It's like, hello, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to do this, and he does it, you know, with his phone, and he says, thanks for watching, goodbye. And often that is just what you need. You know, it's not entertaining, but it's informative, and I think that's quite important. I think
Yeah,
we'll
thank you.
feature on
Thank you very
Andreas as
much.
well.
Thank you very much, YouTube. Really, I mean,
Yeah.
you're using YouTube as a platform,
Yeah,
but you know, don't we all use it for everything nowadays?
exactly.
Oh gosh, yeah.
You know, for building antennas. Oh, go and
Yeah.
look at so and so's YouTube channel. They've done a wonderful piece about how you make a balun for your off-center fed dipole and so on. And you go and watch it, and it does give you all the answers you want. Brilliant.
That's right. If your code plug isn't working, you think, why, what setting have I done wrong or something, then you can find the answer, you know.
Yep, yep.
It's
And
brilliant.
for someone like me who loves DIY, when I was building something which I won't name what it was that I bought from the big Swedish retailer, trying to put it together and was struggling, I remembered that my youngest child had recently bought exactly the same thing. I gave her a ring and said, "How the bloody hell do you do this? I've taken it to bits 6 times and put it back, and it's still not working." And she said, "There's a fantastic video on it, Nick." And she sent me the link on YouTube. I watched it and did it in 10 seconds. So there you go.
There you go.
Those of us playing with stuff on amateur radio, there is so much stuff around to go. I mean, there is a danger in that, of course, that some of the material we pick up on the internet is actually giving incorrect information and is leading us up a bit of a garden path. So we all have to be a little bit careful to keep our critical faculties, I think, when we're watching even very well. I mean, I'm not saying you guys are going to make those mistakes, but, you know, even watching very well produced stuff, people can make mistakes and errors in it and introduce things in a way that's going to cause them problems.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful, don't we?
Absolutely. And we've done that, as we were talking about in the post edit, when we've realized after doing it that something is, we've shot it, done the whole thing, and I've gone away and thought, that doesn't seem right, what I've said, and looked up and you know, of course, you know, you'd get a lot of people would tell you that it was wrong, but it would be a real pain in the butts if it went out like that. So we do try and make sure. I don't think we've had one yet that's gone out where we've said something completely wrong, but it is really easy to misunderstand how, you know, one of these radios with lots of menus and you're getting it to do this, that, and the other, and you think it does something that it doesn't. So you say, oh yes, it has this feature, and it hasn't, or you know, this is how you do this, and it's not how you do it. So yeah, we kind of double check it afterwards, don't we? Even after we've shot it.
Okay, have we got anyone else got a last question or comment to Bob and Nick before we thank them and move on? No, no one else. Your last chance. Yeah, go on, Ken. You're on mute, Ken.
My question is, approximately how many topics do you cover in each series? Do you have a set amount, set number, and how long does each topic last for? How far do you travel when you go to do these? Yeah, well, I was going to almost say an interview then, but that's the wrong word. But and you do certainly come across as being very professional communicators. That was the first thing I noticed. You both sort of gel with each other in the way you communicate. So maybe that's just two questions and one comment, but over to whoever wants to answer it.
Okay, well, I think it varies. We try and do at least three different items within each program. The programs range between about half an hour to up to an hour, and some have gone over the hour. Yeah, so the items could be 5-10 minutes, and then teaser, maybe the free to enter draw, which Jeff knows about, and then another item. And sometimes when we film an item, it could be 30 minutes long, and we think, are we going to cut this down? Or can we spread it over 2 episodes? Or can we do part one at the beginning and then say, have another item in between just to, keep the interest going, and then do part two towards the end of that episode. But of course, with watching something like a YouTube program, you can stop and start. You can come back the next day. You can watch it whenever you like. You can, watch 5-minute chunks, and that's the beauty of TV these days. We don't have to sit there and watch it like the rest of the nation at the same time. And how far do we travel? Well, I mean, it could be, Bob lives down in the darkest depths of Cornwall. So if we film in the shack you can see behind him, then it takes me 3 hours to get there from where I live. And if we've been up to Silcote School, as you probably saw, which is up north somewhere. And we've been to Germany, haven't we, Bob? And all over the place. So yeah, so that involves travel, it involves hotels, and that's thankfully where the sponsorship money goes, and we don't pay ourselves anything. Obviously, expenses we pay ourselves as part of the company that runs TXfactor. But we don't get fees as such. No. I think that answers your questions, Ken. Hopefully.
Yeah, that does, and thank you very much for.
And I do like him as well. So yeah, we do get on.
Yeah.
Thanks very much
Just
for
as
your
well.
presentation.
Yeah, Silcote is near, so it's not far away from us.
Yeah, it's up near the Emily Moor, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
That amazing structure.
Yeah, we're now back to the original mast on Emily Moor because there was a second mast dropped down a few years ago while they were doing repairs on it, and they had to drop it down by helicopter, and they had to do reverse job just a little while ago to take it down. But we can still see that when we do walks on the hills from anywhere around here. You can there's Emily Moor mast. You can see it in the distance there.
We did a few years ago want to do a feature on Emily Moor, didn't we? But
and because they had an active amateur radio club there as well, and they were keen.
Yeah, I'm scared of heights, and so I don't know how we cope with it, to be honest.
My managing director at Pirate FM thought that Emily Moor was a person at the radio station I worked at because the radio desk for commercial radio for all the transmitter sites was based at Emily Moor. So if your transmitter went off in the night, or the lines went down from the studio to the transmitter, so you were transmitting silence, or they have a silence detector at the transmit site. So if they lose the overnight studio, it would kick in and play. Back in the day, it would be a CD. You had a sort of a CD with a mix of your songs and jingles, and this would kick in and play off your transmitter. And at Emily Moor, they would get a little alarm go off, and they would phone me at 3 a.m. As I was the program controller at the station, and say, "Oh, your studio's down, so either your computer's crashed for your overnight service or something." And I would go in and say to the managing director, "I had a call from Emily Moor last night, and we were off the air." And I would tell her, and she just never thought. She said, and one day she said to me, "Oh, could you give Emily a call and ask her about?" I said, "Emily who?" She said, "Emily Moor." That's not a person. It's a place.
Yeah, if you can arrange a visit there sometime, that is fantastic. We the transmitting hall is worth a visit, obviously. And I've been up the mast. I've been very privileged to go up the mast once a long time ago. You don't have to do that, but just the transmitting station, the hall itself, with all the heavy gears in there, is quite fascinating to walk down.
I'd send Bob up the tower anyway.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we do it anymore. I mean, we were privileged at the club many, many years ago, where one of the local amateurs, he was the sort of station manager at MMO, so he got us a visit. That's how it happened.
Right, we'll do it.
Unfortunately,
it's a
long time. It's a long time silent key, so he's not there to arrange it anymore. But
Okay.
Yeah, that was 40 years.
yeah. And as you guys will know, in terms of all those types of buildings and places, all the issues about security that didn't exist 40 years ago exist with knobs on, as you were saying about your trip into New Broadcasting House. You know, you can't even plug your phone in to charge it in the building, you know. So okay, if there's no more questions, just going to give one last call out to anyone who wants to make a point or ask a question they've just thought of. If not, can I thank you guys very much indeed for coming along tonight? Really pleased and lovely to meet you. And can we show our appreciation normal way, everyone? Thank Bob and Nick. There you go. You get a virtual clap as well. There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, for facilitating, and thank you for asking us to be part of it. It's been a great pleasure.
No problem.
A virtual glass of red wine now.
Well done.
Okay, 73s to you both.
Take care. Bye-bye.